This video contains main scenario quest spoilers up to patch 6.0 and makes reference to side content as recent as patch 6.2's Savage Raids. Hello and welcome to Endwalker in Review. Today we're going to be taking a critical look at the expansion's first extreme trial from patch 6.0, the Minstrel's Ballad Zodiark's Fall. I'd like to note that this video is not intended to be a guide, but instead is a critique of the encounter's mechanics and aesthetics. As such, this video is an opinion piece, so if you agree or disagree with my thoughts, feel free to give the video a like or dislike and leave a comment. I will do my best to read them all. With all that said, let's get started with the mechanics side first. Off the bat, there is one very important detail to keep in mind when analyzing the mechanics of this fight. Zodiark is one of two extreme trials released with patch 6.0, the launch of the Endwalker expansion. The trend Square Enix has established over the past few expansions is that the two extreme trials released in expansion launches are tuned to be entry-level high-end duties to prepare would-be raiders for harder content. As such, they are somewhat easier than the average extreme, so I will give this fight a lot of leeway for this reason. Getting into the mechanics proper, Zodiark is a wall boss, which means that it spends the entirety of the fight on the north edge of the platform and has a large targeting ring that reaches the center of the arena. Wall bosses can be divisive for two reasons. First, they do not require melee positionals as the rear and flanks would be inaccessible, and second, they do not require tanks to pull and position them around the arena. This is sometimes maligned by players, especially those who feel the lesser complexity is not justified if the encounter is not unique, creative, or of high enough quality. While Square Enix can definitely find ways to make wall bosses brutally difficult if they need to, like in Phase 2 of Abyssos, the 8th Circle's Savage, they did not do so here. As an entry-level extreme trial, and the first one in the expansion, I think making Zodiark a wall boss was a great choice by the developers to limit the complexity, as many newcomer raiders who started the game in Endwalker's launch window likely tried high-end duties for the first time via this trial. The main concept of this encounter is overlapping AoEs of different shapes telegraphed by combinations of entities within the arena and symbols around the arena perimeter. The twist, pun very much intended, is that Zodiark will turn the arena 90 degrees after telegraphing a mechanic combination, meaning players will have to extrapolate what the resulting position of the dangerous AoEs will be in advance of the arena turning and position themselves accordingly. Personally, I find the encounter executes this idea very effectively. Combinations of large unsafe circles, huge donut-shaped AoEs, the boss dive bombing the arena diagonally, a fire bar which creates a bow tie shape when the arena turns, rectangular rows or columns, and triangles originating from a point on the wall all form the bulk of Zodiark's hazards, and these combinations will frequently feature the inner circle of the aforementioned donut AoE as the safe spot. This large variety of shapes ensures that over the course of the fight's 11-ish minute runtime that there are multiple unique combinations which, when coupled with a small amount of RNG, contributes to keeping things fresh from one pull to the next. In addition, players must pay close attention to their surroundings to see the arrangement of markers on the arena and around the perimeter or risk vulnerability up debuffs, as the AoEs are not ground indicated with typical normal mode orange danger zones. When the arena turns, players are bound in place by a Tenebrous Grasp debuff, which also prevents use of movement actions and can be frustrating as many jobs in the game have movement actions that deal damage and are used in rotation. This means that these actions can drift from their intended place in rotation, which could be viewed as either a challenge to deal with via adjustments or an annoyance to cope with depending on your perspective. Finally, there are other mechanics in the fight to briefly mention. Occasional raid-wide damage, a new to Endwalker stacked stack marker, which indicates multiple hits, a small AoE tank buster, which also applies a debuff requiring a tank swap, which is a very important concept to teach new raiders before they move on to the Savage difficulty, a small ads phase involving more shape dodging, and the Mario Party book squirm-esque Astral Eclipse mechanic. These all serve to shake things up throughout the fight, the last of which is definitely a highlight of the fight for me, as it is intuitive in concept, but it is still easily misread if not careful. There is a very important caveat to acknowledge about this trial's mechanics. Overall, they do not give players individual responsibilities, spreads, towers, or really any other reason to be apart from one another, and as such, a safe spot is a safe spot for all 8 players. This fact actually resulted in the creation of a very popular method for clearing the fight, where one player will use an overhead sign and read the mechanics so that other players simply have to follow the sign without observing the tells and resolving the combinations on their own. If this trial was further along in Endwalker's content cycle, I might call it a problem that 7 party members can play follow the leader and get through the duty. However, since this is the first and most entry-level high-end duty in the entire expansion, I actually think it's completely okay. This is because by having very few individual responsibilities, beginner raiders are able to have their first raiding experience with relatively little study. It's very easy for one experienced raider to teach this trial to newcomers, and in turn, these newcomers can even pass on the knowledge gained if they transition over multiple clears, from following the leader to reading and interpreting the mechanics on their own. While some more seasoned raiders I know expressed disappointment in this aspect of the encounter, I think a more experienced raider seeking a challenge should specifically go out of their way to do this trial as the leader or teacher with the marker over their head, reading these mechanics out for everybody else. All things considered, I think the difficulty level and mechanics are spot on for the first extreme in the expansion, especially as it includes many basics for high-end duty content while being very teachable and carryable for experienced raiders looking to help beginners get started in endgame raiding. At the time of this video, it is currently patch 6.3, and as such, even beginner raiders who keep up with normal mode rewards or have crafted gear are now over-geared for this extreme trial, which required item level 560 to enter and rewarded item level 580 accessories. Over-geared players will generally kill the boss early, skipping mechanics or permutations of mechanics, as well as taking less damage from damage sources in the fight. In the case of this fight being an ideal beginner raid, this may not necessarily be a bad thing, but players looking to have a more authentic experience with this fight should consider using the minimum item level duty finder setting or use era appropriate gear such as item level 570 moonward gear available for the sack of nuts currency from the hunt rewards vendors. In aesthetic terms, Zodiark's arena is situated in the dark and mysterious chasm on the moon, with a starry motif appearing during the astral eclipse mechanic really highlighting Zodiark's astral-aligned aspect. Even the reward token named Astral Totem fits with this theme. The stage floor pattern implies obvious points for placing useful cardinal and intercardinal waymarks, and the tells and indicators are appropriately bright and high contrast with the arena for gameplay purposes, while also having elaborate runes and sigil patterns in their design to portray the idea of ancient magic. Also, the Paradigma mechanic spawns 3 types of entities: behemoths, Quetzalcoatl, and snakes, and by this point in the game's story, the behemoths and Quetzalcoatl are known to be creations of the ancients, but the snakes are more reminiscent of the Allagan ones seen in the Coils of Bahamut raids from A Realm Reborn, an appearance which could be explained by the presence of Fandaniel as Zodiark's core, who was formerly the Allagan Ammon. Zodiark's appearance in Extreme skips normal mode's mask phase, where he looks more like the cave painting representation seen in the previous expansion Shadowbringers. Instead, this trial opts for Zodiark to be unmasked from the beginning of the fight, showing off his look more closely associated with the Yoshitaka Amano version of his concept art. This means that there is no mask-breaking cutscene, as well as no cutscene during the first arena rotation as in normal mode. After Eden's verse Refulgence Savage in Shadowbringers made raiders sit through a very lengthy cutscene every pull, omitting mid-battle cutscenes from the high-end duty versions of fights that show cutscenes in normal mode is a welcome adjustment. Regarding the audio of the encounter, the English voice acting, which is the version I am familiar with, is suitably harrowing as Fandaniel taunts the Warrior of Light and revels in his newfound power, even stating that in comparison, quote, "the marvels of Circus were but playthings." He sounds unhinged, drunk on Zodiark's power and on the precipice of his world-ending ambitions. However, I have to personally admit that I find it a bit underwhelming to be listening to Fandaniel's voice during this boss fight as a consequence of the storyline. With Zodiark being a mysterious villain built up over the course of a decade, while Fandaniel was introduced a mere 3 patches before Endwalker's release, I might have preferred that Zodiark had his own voice, or at the least, the voice of a character who we as players spent more time with, and who I feel more invested in, like Xenos or even Elidibus had we not dealt with him in 5.3. That said, using Xenos here would have deprived us of his excellent reappearance at the final trial of the MSQ, so it's a small gripe, and I think the story as a whole is better for it, even if it did slightly affect my enjoyment of the themes of this trial. Similarly, while Zodiark missing chunks of its body due to being only 7 times rejoined is a very cool visual effect, it also draws attention to the idea that this is not a fully unsundered Zodiark. But maybe that idea is best left to the Wandering Minstrel to explore in a future Ultimate Difficulty raid. Ultimately, though, these complaints are really only tiny blemishes on an otherwise great extreme trial. So, to summarize, I'm very pleased with the design of the fight from a mechanical perspective, especially given the fresh concept of turning the arena mid-mechanic. The aesthetics and story behind the fight give me that one little crumb of a nitpick about the voice acting, but I think for the greater good of the main story, it probably couldn't be helped. All in all, this fight is nearly a perfect fulfillment of an expansion's first extreme trial slot, and an excellent entry point into raiding high-end duties for any newcomer to Final Fantasy XIV's more challenging content. If you made it all the way here, thanks for watching, and please consider subscribing. It helps the channel to grow and keeps you up to date on any new videos. Thank you, and see you in the next one.